Hello, and welcome to I Hate Talking, a podcast about talking, including etymology, frustrating topics, current events, and other random subjects. I'm Adam.
And I'm Steph. We are married, and we invite you into these discussions with us as we talk about the good and the bad of talking.
We hope you enjoy today's episode. Well, we are here yet again with another episode of I Hate Talking, and this is episode 13.
Lucky 13.
And we actually did offline discuss whether we would include the numeral 13 in our list of episodes because of that very reason, whether many people consider it to be actually unlucky. But we are here with episode 13.
Michael Scott's. I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious.
Indeed. And I think based on the things that we discussed just the very last episode with specificity, that it would come to no surprise to many people that know me personally that I would be quite taken aback if I was to skip a number in sequence.
Definitely. Have you experienced times in podcasts or books and stuff where that is skipped and it makes you do a double take?
No, I don't think so. I think the books or podcasts that I've read, I'm either not paying attention that closely on something of that nature or just haven't seen that. I have experienced personally the lack of the digit 13 in elevators because they don't have that floor in buildings because of the unlucky nature within certain cultures of the number 13. There's also, I think, a few cultures that consider the number 9 unlucky, and therefore they would exclude that as well.
Interesting.
So we are nonetheless in episode 13, and we're going to be talking about some phrases today as our word or phrase of the episode. And this is going to be in the vein of some colloquialisms that are often used incorrectly. So for those that don't know, a colloquialism is a familiar expression that's used informally. So like in an informal speech, it may be something that is not necessarily literally taken to be part of what a person is describing. And it also may be, in some terms, considered slang. So some popular examples would be saying, "You're nuts," or "Don't chicken out," or "I wasn't born yesterday." Those things are not literally true, and you're going to be typically a native speaker of the language in order to be able to understand these things. So there's one that we want to nip in the bud at the very start, and that is the phrase, "nip it in the bud."
I was it yesterday? Maybe 2 days ago, I asked you what the actual phrase was because I saw on social media somebody kind of mocking their wife, but also like in a nice way, not trying to humiliate her. But apparently she thought it was "nip it in the butt." And I would have paid money that was the phrase. And I asked you before I shared any of that. I was like, "What's that phrase? Nip it in the..." And you said, "Bud." Oh, okay. That's it.
Right. And I've actually done a little bit of research to try to figure out where the phrase "nip it in the butt" comes from. And I cannot find it because everything...
But have you heard it?
I actually have heard that once before.
By me?
No, it was many, many years ago, but I could not find where this was coming from, where people are using it incorrectly, because the correct phrase is "nip it in the bud," because you're talking about something that would be growing, or, you know, a flower or something in your garden that before it gets too large, that you want to nip it before it grows or gains momentum. So you nip it in the bud. And that is the proper phrase for that particular colloquialism.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. We used to have a lot of roses. We used to have a rose garden at our old house. And every year we would have to prune them. And yes, you nip it in the bud, which makes sense. But I literally would have put money down on nip it in the butt.
Indeed. So the other one that we will be using in this episode is tempering your expectations. So we may not really have a very robust outline for this episode, so maybe our listeners must temper their expectations on how good this episode is going to be. But one of the often used incorrect words when using that phrase is tamper your expectations.
I'm trying to think of how I say it. Now that I'm hearing you say it, I don't know which one I would say. Temper. Go ahead and explain, because I would not blink an eye at either of those.
And they do sound very similar. And that may also be perhaps part of why people are using these phrases incorrectly, is maybe they hear someone use it correctly and they either don't know the word that is being used, bud or temper, and are therefore replacing it with the more common phrase that they know of because they're more familiar with the word butt or tamper, or perhaps that they are just mishearing it and they know both words, butt and bud, but when people are speaking quickly or not clearly, that maybe they're hearing the wrong word, and those could be some reasons that we even have words come to fruition as the course of language evolves. But in this particular case, temper and tamper, two words, very similar in spelling and pronunciation, but very different definitions. So we'll start with the wrong one, which is tamper, and that is meaning to meddle with or interfere or in some way alter. Usually uses a verb to tamper with something. You're going to change it without authorization, and it's going to, in most sense, be something that is going to make that thing that you are tampering with deficient. So you may, for example, tamper with someone's brakes in their car, and that would be a bad thing, but that is what the word tamper typically means.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. But I also like what you're saying of maybe our brain is instantly going to the word tamper instead of temper, because we use that phrase more often. But once you start thinking about what it actually means, that doesn't make sense.
Exactly. So most people, when they hear the word temper, are probably thinking of the noun with someone's temper, as in temperament, whether they get angry easily or they're more happy-go-lucky. But as a verb, temper means to subject something to reducing the intensity. So it could be used in metallurgy with basically cooling metal and then reheating it and cooling it in order to strengthen it. That is called tempering of metal. It also could mean, like I said, to reduce the intensity. It can also mean to tune a musical instrument, which is an interesting use of the word. And then it also, and I think we're using it in this particular phrase, temper your expectations, is metaphorically to mean to soften the influence of something. And it basically means that we need to have a reasonable expectation when we temper our expectation.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you're thinking about temper, like temperature, and how it can go hot or cold, tempering your expectations. Are your expectations really high and hot, or are they cool and low?
Now, here's the crazy thing about the etymology of these words is that temper, and the one that we are using in the phrase of the episode, temper your expectations, came from the Latin word temperare, which means to restrain or moderate. So that is in line, for the most part, with how it is used in the modern context, with either reducing the intensity or tuning something to make it in line with the expectation. But the word tamper actually comes from the word temper. And this happened in around the 14th or 15th century in the same language within Latin, and has come to since mean that it is something that interferes with something to cause damage or make unauthorized alterations, or to exert a secret or corrupt influence upon someone or something. But it came specifically from the word temper and turned into tamper. So there may have been some Latin, and I think this eventually came into the English lexicon as well, that misheard this word and somehow came to use it in a completely new definition, and that came to be, we don't really know, other than that this is around the actually mid-16th century here. It says that this came to be a split in the word and definition.
So hundreds of years later, we may be using this phrase because somebody misspoke initially.
Indeed.
Okay, can we also talk about the phrase that always bothers me when people say, I couldn't care less? Every time they say that in my brain, I'm thinking, wait, you couldn't care less. But that means you do care then, right? So the phrase is, I could care less. Have you ever heard that phrase, though? I could care less.
So I think the incorrect phrase that is used is, I could care less, because that means that when you're talking about something that you don't care about at all, that you actually could care less about it, so that you do actually care about it a little bit. So the phrase to use it properly is, I couldn't care less, and to not use the contraction there, to use it properly would be, I could not care less, because you have a level of caring, and that level of caring is described by whether you could care more or care less. And when you're saying this phrase, I could not care less, that means that it is at already the minimum bound of caring in terms of this thing that you were talking about.
Okay, so is it where the article in the phrase is put then? Because I could not care less means you can't physically care less. I couldn't care less. Wait, now I'm confused. We'll just cut this out. Don't worry about it. Do you know what I'm saying, though? What am I saying?
So perhaps part of the confusion on this particular phrase is because a contraction is used where you are combining the words could and not into couldn't, and that may be misheard or misinterpreted by the hearer as could, because they are not hearing the nint of the couldn't. So perhaps another learning from this episode and this podcast series is, when we want to be explicitly clear, we should not use contractions.
Noted.
So the phrase, I could care less, is the incorrect phrase.
Right.
And the correct phrase is, I could not care less. Or when using the contraction, I couldn't care less.
I'm confused at what I'm saying now.
And there may be those listeners that are even wondering what contractions are. And we're talking about many different parts of speech, I guess, this episode. And that is where you take two words and shorten it and combine it into one word. So other examples are can't, where that would be the contraction of the two words can not, and don't, where that is the contraction of do not, and I've, where that is a contraction of I have. And there's many, many more, but those are some common ones that I think are used in everyday speech. And perhaps couldn't is not used that frequently, and therefore is maybe apt for misinterpretation or mishearing.
Is it people misspeaking and they're saying, I could care less? That's what they're saying, right? And then you're like, wait, that means less that you could care.
So I guess it is possible that someone is not using the phrase improperly, but they are using the phrase properly and actually have a different meaning of what they would normally utilize this colloquialism for, is that they actually do care about it. And therefore, if they said, I could care less, and actually meant that those specific words were what they were really trying to convey, is that they do care about the subject that they're talking about.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, there you have it. We've spent nearly half the episode talking about our phrases of the episode.
Wait, we're not going to cut all that.
And we may cut some of it. We may nip it in the bud. Or we may leave it. Who knows? I think that our listeners will just have to temper their expectations.
Nice.
All right. So on to our actual content for this episode. So go ahead and tell us what we will be talking about as we continue on this journey beyond our phrases of the episode.
Okay. So we just got back from vacation. We spent a week down in Florida. Had a wonderful time. Unfortunately, not for our family, but for other families, there was a tragedy that happened. If y'all are following the news, it's not going to be super recent news. But the day we were leaving, we packed up from where we were staying, and me and the kids hit the pool at the hotel we were at. But you love the beach, and so you went into the ocean. I did not want the kids in the ocean. I didn't want them sandy on the drive home. So we stayed at the pool, and you went to the ocean. And unfortunately, little known to us, that moments pretty much after you got out of the water, there was a shark attack a few miles down the road from us. I think what we're talking about first, there was that shark attack. It was a lady, to give her respect. She is okay, but she definitely lost some limbs and her life is forever changed. She was a wife and a mom. Her family was there with her on the beach. And then a little over an hour after that, 2 teenage girls got attacked. One is still in the hospital. And so again, just giving them the respect and their families that their lives are forever changed by this situation. So talking about, it's a little heavier than what we were just talking about, but just saying, yeah, that things happen and we don't expect it. And you could have very well been those people that were injured that while we were, but we were getting out of the pool, we were drying off. You had gotten out of the water already and joined us in the pool when this tragedy happened.
Indeed, that is true. And certainly that happening on that particular day was unexpected, but it could have happened any day. And we were all in the water many days previous to that. And we even saw some schools of fish going crazy. And we had attributed that to dolphins within the water because there had been some earlier dolphin sightings within the area, and there were even some boat tours that were out further in the water that were being able to observe the dolphins. So we attributed those schools of fish going crazy to dolphins hunting for fish, but it may very well have been, in fact, a shark.
Yeah, and the day prior, we were in the ocean, and a stingray passed us, and one of our kids, it was so close. He was a little farther out than I was, and the stingray was on his other side. He could have reached out and touched it if he was aware and wanting to. He realized what was happening. He got out quickly. So when I've seen, these schools of fish, we've had seen dolphins jumping. We saw that stingray. It wasn't a big deal. So all this week, I keep just thinking about how different these families' lives are. that these 3 individuals were lost limbs and they're still in the hospital. And how different had you been the individual that was attacked? In my head, I keep playing like I would call your boss. I would call these people and we'd have to get a hotel room because we would still be down there right now. And just that carefree, how wonderful the beach was. It was so warm and it was so enjoyable. But in just a few moments, these individuals' lives are changed forever.
Indeed, and I think that they were not expecting this to happen. And even for those that are unfamiliar with sort of how the beach works within that area of the ocean, is that there will be a very slight drop off and then a first sandbar, and then it will drop off more significantly down maybe to 10 or 12 feet depending on the tide. And then there will be a second sandbar where you can typically touch, and during low tide will be actually even knee deep. And that is typically how the ocean will work and how you would be able to sort of swim within that area. So most of these shark sightings that happen that same day or the following days, because there have been just many, many sharks observed since this time, are actually within the second sandbar, and are, in the cases of the attack on the middle-aged woman, happened right outside the first sandbar, and then the attack on the 2 teenage girls occurred right at the first sandbar, or even within the first sandbar, so very, very close to shore. So there were instances where myself and our oldest were actually swimming out to the second sandbar, quite distant from the shore, whereas these attacks were happening within the very shallows, where typically people are going to be swimming within that first sandbar area.
Yeah, and you just think it's the ocean. This is where sharks live and other sea animals like stingrays and dolphins. This is their home, and I understand that. But we definitely have a false sense of safety. When I'm thinking, you guys, I felt like you guys were not in danger, but more in danger than me and the little kids closer to the shore. But can be a false sense of security, knowing that they can come up to that close.
And perhaps we were even in the safer spot because the sharks were hunting the fish in the shallows, and we were actually safer further away from shore.
That's true. Well, you did try to even explain not shark related, but prior, one of our kids was refusing to go that far, but he was right at the breakers. And so the waves kept breaking right on him. And you were trying to convince him if he went out slightly farther, he'd actually have an easier time. And he didn't believe you, and eventually just came in to closer to shore. But it reminds me of that when you're saying, like, in his head, the farther you go out, the more danger there is. But sometimes it actually is safer.
Indeed. And not only do we have to expect the unexpected and temper our expectations, we also must have realistic expectations on risk, because although this is a tragedy and these people's lives are changed forever, it is the year 2024, and there has not been a fatality related to a shark attack in the state of Florida since 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And people are more often killed by rip currents than sharks every single summer within this area, because that is the actual danger, is dangerous currents, rip currents, being swept out to sea and drowning rather than being attacked by a shark.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that more people do you know the stat on how many people pass away in a pool than the ocean? I assume quite a bit more every year, right?
I'd assume so. I'd have to do a little bit of research to see what that is based on the weighted average, because typically you're going to have more people in a pool on a regular basis than probably visit the ocean, because for our family in particular, right, we're going to be in the pool 50 to 60 days out of the year, but only in the ocean 4 or 5. So that is also going to play a part in those statistics. But yes, I certainly think that not only is the frequency of time spent within these particular locales of a pool versus the ocean, is that the pool is more normal and therefore not regarded as a particular danger.
Right. Here's a stat. It reminds me that it says more people die from toasters every year than shark attacks. And it sounds insane, but it's more people use a toaster daily. You're not in the ocean. The majority of society is not in the ocean daily.
Indeed. So there is some sort of frequency bias that must be considered, that not only is the danger of these particular activities or devices being considered, but also the frequency at which you use them.
But again, I mean, just going back to just giving these 3 ladies, the 2 teens and the woman, a moment just that them and their families, their lives are changed forever. Also, at that point, I'm so thankful that we were safe and that you were safe. I will be struggling next year if and when we go to the ocean, not thinking about that. And the reality is the chances of that happening are so low. But the fact that it was so close to us while we were there, it is hard to not be afraid of that.
Indeed, and that, I think, does play a part in the human psyche that we've been talking about over the course of many episodes, because I particularly don't think that it is necessarily a high degree of danger. Yes, there are things in the ocean that can hurt you, but as we've just said, some of those things are going to be more innocuous, like just the flow of water being more dangerous than these animals that live within their own habitat. And just as to put it in a different perspective, we drove quite a distance to be able to get there. How many near misses on accidents just in those 2 different drives that we took were we involved in?
Right. On the way down there, we were in 2 back-to-back by the same driver, extremely close accidents. And there were others, but I was driving at both of those, and I asked you, because you were watching, I was like, could I have done anything different? It was the same driver behind us both times. And I was validated. You validated me and say, no, like, you did the right thing both times. It's that individual. But one of those times I thought for sure we were in an accident, but there was nowhere else I could go. I couldn't veer off. And we were moments away from, like, inches from an accident.
Indeed. And I think the same thing goes for those things that people consider as potential health pitfalls. There is a lot of concern about cancer or injuries or things of that nature. But when you get down to it, heart disease and heart issues, typically because of lack of activity or poor diet or a combination thereof, is the greatest killer from a health perspective. So we've talked about a number of things, and hopefully some of these things have brought insight to our listeners in terms of not only expecting the unexpected, but also tempering your expectations and making sure that you have realistic expectations and realistic understandings of risk and success for these things that you partake in day to day. So, from your friends at I Hate Talking, until next time, remember, it is only through talking that we begin the journey to understanding.